everyone, it's Natalie, and today we're going to be doing a palette, dupe the vibes, BIOP, build your own palette video. I haven't done like a dupe the vibes palette in a while. There just hasn't been an eyeshadow palette that I was like, oh my god, if I don't get this, I'm gonna lose my mind. Or that like I felt was like super duper unique. Like I've bought palettes lately that I'm just like, oh, this like really interests me, I'm interested in the formula. But this palette in particular really caught my eye as being incredibly unique, and I wanted to see if I could recreate the vibes of the palette, essentially the color story, with my own pre-existing eyeshadow collection. This palette, I have it on my computer screen here, is the Oceano palette from Clionadh. It is gorgeous. So many lovely color combos that I really enjoy. Various tones of green, blue with the peach is something that's really interesting to me. And there's a couple sort of purpley colors in there too. I love Clionadh. I have so many Clionadh eyeshadows, and I think we'll definitely be using some today in the look. And while I'm yapping, I'm gonna do my concealer. I love Clionadh eyeshadows, and I've definitely spent a lot of money on Clionadh eyeshadows. They are not cheap. It's a very small brand, and I believe the eyeshadows are handmade. There are really some incredibly unique multi-chromes in their stained glass collection. Also, I have a couple of their like normal metallics, and I really enjoy those too. They're just super unique colors, and not just that, but the formulas are absolutely out of this world. Like it doesn't even compare to some of the brands. But they haven't done palettes in years. They did a like all multi-chrome palette a couple of years ago, the Deep Sea Treasures, and it didn't really intrigue me because it was just 8 single shadows basically, and I'd rather just buy them individually, like the ones I want specifically. They did a while ago like the 2 other palettes in this collection, the Paleo and Archeo palettes, and they haven't had them in a while because they were completely handmade at the time. Even the packaging was handmade, and this was quite a few years ago. It was before I knew about the brand. And now they've redone them in their like new updated versions, also with this completely new Oceano palette. And the other palettes are really pretty, but they're not hugely my vibe. But this Oceano palette definitely spoke to me as being so beautiful, and it does really give ocean, like coral reef, like sea creatures, fish and stuff. I just love the color story. I was mostly inspired to do this because I watched a review of the palette by Angelica Neefist, who I have several of her own collab palettes with other brands, and she made such a pretty look that I kind of like was inspired by it to do my own look, which I'll put the picture of here. It should be on my Instagram as well by this time. I really loved that look, but she didn't. She said that she didn't really love the color combos for some reason, or that it was just a little bit difficult to work with. And I can see that being the case because the palette only has like 4 or 5 mattes looking at it. Like one of the dark mattes, like I don't know if it's a complete matte, it looks a little bit satiny. It does make sense that like if you're someone who likes to use a lot of matte colors and maybe only like 1 or 2 shimmers, it would be difficult to create a look because it's a mostly shimmer and mostly multi-chrome palette. And I think it can be really hard to create a look with more than 1 multi-chrome at a time just because there's so many colors going off. When I was looking through my collection at palettes that even gave a really similar vibe, the palette that actually had the most direct dupes is the Kaleidos Club Nebula palette, which is a collab with Angelica Neefist. So I think it's funny that she didn't really love the palette or find it easy to use, when in this palette there's, you know, the mossy green, the blue, the deep blue, the 2 peaches, the green shimmer, the like blue translucent shimmer. This one is like that. So I mean, there's so many similar colors in this palette, and actually my closest shade from like swatching it out is this shade Samus for the peach tone. It's very like neon, like white based peach. It's not as neon and punchy as the one in the Oceano palette, but it's the closest I have in my collection just because I don't have a lot of colors like that. I don't love orange eyeshadow on me. And the other shade that I knew was gonna be really difficult for me to dupe is the orangey multi-chrome. So in that look, I used the shade Nebula here, which kind of gives the orange multi-chrome vibe. It's more of like a peachy pink to like orange, like duochrome sort of a thing. When it comes to like the mossy green and like the mid-tone green and even like the blues, like the other four mattes are like, I have 1 million of those colors. It's like any like mossy color. This is just like the first one that came to mind because it's like a more recent one to me, but this is Bossing Say from Lethal Cosmetics in Angelica's other collab palette with Oden's Eye. This is the Hela palette. This is the shades Moss and the shade Ouroboros. In the Kaleidos palette, there's this shade Gravity, which is more of like a punchier apple green, but it's still kind of that like mossy grungy green. And then also the shade Queen of Blades, which is just like a more blue version of Ouroboros, which I think is more similar to the one in the palette. Actually, it's more of that like slightly blue based one. Even if we're looking at like mainstream eyeshadow palettes, this is the Natasha Nona Yucca palette, which I really love. The shade in here, Acacia, is another one of those sort of like grungy greens. This one's definitely more on the neutral side, but you know, it's not. It actually is crazy how much more neutral it looks next to the other greens when it comes across so green. But there's this shade Calathea in here, which is another one of those. Oh, that's also crazy. Oh, it looks so much less bright compared to these shades, but on its own, it like seems quite colorful. Blend palette, these are a lot more like true tone, like brighter shades, but the shade Submerged is maybe the closest actually to the teal in that palette because it has that brightness. But like the blue, for example, the lighter one in here, Bubble Bath, that's a little bit paler than the one in the Clionadh palette. Let's see. In the Kaleidos palette, this shade 7 of 9 is also pretty accurate. I believe this shade stains ever so slightly, on me at least. Colourpop palettes are not my absolute favorite, but I do have a bunch because I think they're a great option. The shade Starry Eyed in the Blue Moon palette is actually going to be our closest to the blue in that Clionadh palette. It's just that like perfect mid-tone blue. In the High Tide palette, I quite like this one because the tones are really unique, but the shade here, Urchin, is also another for like, ooh, this grumbly. Yeah, that Urchin shade is incredibly close to the darker teal in this Oceano palette. So if this shade from Colourpop is kind of a dupe for Lagoon and this one's a dupe for Manta Ray, over here the Lethal Cosmetics one I think is the closest for Archipelago. And then obviously we have, let's bring out that Samus shade again for the peach. That's gonna be our dupe for Starfish. The dark blue in here is actually a little bit of shimmer to it, which is actually not something I like. I feel like the closest one though is going to be Spellbound because it is really, really dark from the Blend Bunny Blends palette, and it has like a hint of purple. It's almost like a slight indigo color. It looks like nearly black on camera, but it is this like indigo pigment. I bet if I put a little black next to it, you'd see that it is not black. So there you go. So once again, the mattes, really the only difficult color was the Samus shade. Well, the Samus shade in the Kaleidos palette I used, but Starfish in the Oceano palette. I mean, how many shades from this palette did we use? A lot. When it comes to the shimmers, that's gonna be a little more difficult only because the shimmers are multi-chromes for the most part. It seems like every single one of them in this palette are multi-chromes, maybe except for the Tidal shade, which is just like a really strong blue metallic. I'm gonna start though. I think the only shade I have for the Mana Loa shade is Nebula from the Kaleidos palette. It's the only thing I have that gives that like flip. It's definitely like a hot pink, whereas it's like the one in the palette is like more like hot orange. Next shade is the shade Plankton, and this is to me very similar to a pre-existing shade from Clionadh called Motif. It is one of these like neon pastel greens that has a shift to, seems like the one in the palette maybe shifts to purple. This one shifts to pink. It's like pretty similar. You can see how it's pink in the natural light, but green over here. So I really like this one. The next shade is Seagrass, is one of those gold green to green to blue shades. That's one of my favorites. I think Clionadh has a lot of those. This right here though is Patina. It's a black based multi-chrome, so it's gonna be a little bit darker than the one in the palette, but that's basically the same vibe. Wow, that is beautiful. I love these. I love them. So you can see it's the gold green to blue shift. This one has a black base. The other shades, Bioluminescent. This is one of those like UV blue colors. I have a couple of those from Clionadh themselves. This shade I believe is called Radiance. The shade in this Kaleidos palette, Nova, is very dry to the touch, but is more purple. You can see it's more purple. It's still not like a bright like that shade is, but it's purple instead of blue. I actually think the shade I have from Terra is gonna be the closest. The shade Lightspeed has this sheer yellow base, but it just kind of smooths out, and then on top is the like brighter purple shift. It just looks really wet on camera actually, but in person you can see the purple a lot more. There is another Shimmers palette called Ocean Glass. The closest thing I can think of is from this Oden's Skuld palette, the shade Fantasy right here. It's not as like shiny, like shimmery, but it does have like a similar tone, and it has like more of like a pearlized finish, but it's the same kind of like base color. The other shade in here is this really dark blue metallic called Tidal. I have a couple shades that come to mind. This is maybe my favorite palette of all time, my Cosmic Brushes Winter Wonderland palette. There's obviously a lot of great mattes in here, but the shade Chill I think is gonna be the closest to this Tidal shade because it's just such a true blue shimmer. So yeah, that's dead on. The final shimmer shade in this palette is this purpley color called Urchin, and I actually think the closest thing I have to this is going to be in that water palette from Avatar: The Last Airbender, the shade Spirit Oasis. And I don't use shades like this a lot because it's a very dark shimmer, so it's not even like something I care about duping necessarily, but like, I mean, that's a little bit more blue than purple. I think we have something here that we can work with to create a look using the Clionadh palette. I have a bunch more of these mossy shades, by the way, from like Sydney Grace and stuff, and also from the Natasha Metropolis palette and from Melt Cosmetics. It's like an incredibly common shade, so pick your poison with that. So now with our concept that this palette from Angelica Napist is strangely close to the Oceano palette and all of the other colors that we've found, I think the best ones were probably like a mix between the Blend Bunny palette, the Colourpop palettes. For the green, any of those greens, of which there are many. I think we're gonna start, and what I wanna do is what I've been doing with all of these looks with this palette is using that coral shade in the inner corner. And this is a Refer 14, and I'm gonna use the shade Samus from the Club Nebula palette This palette, when it came out, was like literally everything, and I honestly think it's still really revolutionary. In lots of ways, the color story is just so unique. I just really enjoy this palette and have been enjoying it consistently over the years. It's just very beautiful, and I know that Kaleidos is a Chinese brand, so they've been doing things lately that are more intended for the Chinese makeup audience, but I hope they don't forget this audience that just absolutely loves this stuff, because this one is so good. I mean, yeah, like what a weird shade, and it just blends so perfectly. I'm going to then use the tealy matte shade that in this palette we determined was the shade Urchin. Was really close, and I liked that. I'm going to use Refer 13 for this. The Colourpop eyeshadows, I really like some of them. As I've gotten other eyeshadow palettes from indie brands and stuff, they just haven't really stuck up at like the top of my mind. Like I don't think about them anymore as things to reach for, because there's just so many better things in my collection now. If you are new to makeup, if you're new to colorful makeup, I would definitely recommend Colourpop. If you're just a casual makeup person that only likes neutrals, I would of course recommend Colourpop, because all their neutrals I think work wonderfully. But as I'm looking for something more unique, more colorful, more sparkly, more interesting, their colorful eyeshadows just don't hold up anymore. They just don't last as well. They fade and they crease, which is just not really something I experience with lots of brands. I'm kind of keeping the edges of the mattes a little messy because I'm gonna be putting on like several multi-chromes. I'm gonna be doing a multi-chrome look, so it can be kind of messy. I really actually want to use the blue shimmer that we used in place of the blue shimmer here from the Winter Wonderland Cosmic Brushes palette. In here it's the shade Chill. It actually has like an ever so slight purple shift. I'm going to actually use a glitter primer for this, because the Cosmic Brushes shimmers are beautiful, but they do like crease. They're a little squishy. I don't use like glitter glue primer a lot. I only use it if like creasing is like a huge issue with certain shades, because I just feel like it always like messes up the mattes below. And also I have like no idea how much to put on. I'm a little bit clueless with like the glitter glue eyeshadow primer squad, but like that's sticky now. That is sticky. Also, I don't like how you can like feel it. Like I can, like it's like gluing my eyelids together right now. It's kind of funny. I'm putting that on the outer corner. Maybe I should use a brush, but it's kind of too late. I'm just following that teal wing shape that I made. And I'm gonna put something else on top of this too. So it looks a little dark, but I'm gonna be layering. So you can see it's just stuck on there. I haven't like blended out the edge of everything because I'm gonna be layering a shimmer on top of all of it again. But I love this like peach and this blue. I love that part of this palette. I'm gonna do kind of like what I did with my previous look. I used the shade Nebula from the Kaleidos palette on the inner corner. Wow, that really comes to life over the glitter glue. But the amazing thing that happened was when I put this shade over the green, it became gold and it was so beautiful. It's not really happening now because it's blue, but I loved that color combo that I did with this color story. More like mossy colors with the peach instead of like the blue color with the peach. Yeah, that's beautiful. Like I love those colors together, the peach and the blue. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of follow where those two colors meet, because it's like a really strong like line of demarcation between those colors. Those colors don't love each other. And so that's where I'm going to put the green shade Motif from Clionadh. This is my Clionadh palette. Motif looks like this in the pan. It's like sort of unassuming, but it's really soft. Like you can pick up a lot accidentally. So I'm just following over top of both those shades, just tapping in between them, and then on the edge of the blue putting it there. I really like shimmer on the crease because I think it just really opens up the eye, and I love the painterly effect of like all the shimmers interacting. It's very watercolory. Really dark blues like that do not blend out normal on my skin tone just because I'm so fair, and so they do require some sort of blending situation. So I'm just tapping with this shimmer to blend the edges. Since this shimmer has a really light green base, like it's just very mild, there's not much of it, it just kind of blends into it really smoothly. So I feel like I talked so much about all those mossy colors that I should use one just because I talked about it. And ultimately I do like mossy colors more than like a mid-tone blue, especially if I'm doing something on the lower lash line. So that's what I'm gonna go for. I'm gonna find one of those mossy colors and use that on the lower lash line part. I'm gonna go with the Bossing Say shade from the Lethal Cosmetics palette, but as I said, there are so many, and even I was looking through again, and these are some of my singles from other indie brands, and these ones are from Sydney Grace, and like this shade, Green Anjou, is like dead on for like that grungy, like mossy kind of tone. And also this blue, Boy Crazy, is like even better maybe than the Cosmic Brushes one for that kind of blue tone. I'm just gonna take this mossy green, and I prefer this color with my skin tone than like a medium blue. I'm also blending it out into that like wing that we did with the Tealy shade, just to kind of get all those colors to be friends with each other. I just really loved how random and like freeing this color story was. It felt very like a picture of sea life, and I just enjoyed that fish vibe. Because this look is very dramatic, I'm gonna put a little bit more face powder on my under eyes just to get a little bit more sort of coverage situation going on down there. I really like that. If I was going to really go insane with the shimmers, I might use a bluey sort of shimmer, like the bluey purpley one. I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm gonna like hold my socks together or whatever. I'm just gonna apply mascara. This is the kind of look that you think looks literally insane until you put mascara on, and then you're like, ooh, we did it. And because this looks pretty intense, I'm gonna forego mascara on the lower lashes, only because I feel like that would just be like a really dark and a lot. But I think something that would look really good on the lower lashes with this look would be like a colorful mascara, or like a colorful liner in the waterline or something would be really pretty. Alas, I do not have. The other thing left for me to do is a little bit of blush. With a look like this, I like to do a softer blush. I'm gonna be using this Romand blush. I don't think they have this exact color anymore, but just a really pale shade, so it shows up very mildly on my skin tone, and you can even see that it shows up quite a lot just then. But like compared to other blushes, this is mild. Just like for how pale I am. And I'm gonna top it with the RMS one. This is a little bit shimmery, so I like this one. Actually, it's a little bit shimmery, but I like it all over the cheek because it's just like a soft luminescence. But right now I'm kind of using it to blend like this bronzy tone all over. This is a Rephr 18. This is like a really wonderful face brush if you like a more precise face blush for a precise blush application. I do feel like because this looks a little heavy on the outer corner that it does actually call for some highlight, which I don't always say, but I'm saying it now. And I'm just using the white in the Dior palette. This for me isn't very blinding on my skin. It's more natural because I'm very white. So I'm doing a little bit of inner corner highlight here just to add a little extra brightness to my inner corner. I feel like it can get very dark in there very quick, which is kind of what happened with like all these tones happening. And then for the face, I'm going to use just a little. This is, I love these old BH Cosmetics brushes, RIP BH Cosmetics, but just a little bit of it. just right there. That's just like some brightness. But there we go. That is the look that I'm feeling with this Clionadh Oceano palette, dupe the vibes situation. A little bit of a lippy never hurt, so. And I just love these colors so much. I'll have a clip inserted here of me in the sunlight really showing all the reflex of these different shades. But I just love the like fish coral reef inspired vibe. It is just so perfect to me, and I still love the Oceano palette. I might eventually get it because as we've determined, there's a couple shades in there that I can't exactly dupe. Although for $90, I don't know if that's entirely worth it for me, just because it's expensive. But yeah, I absolutely love this look. I've loved every look that I've done inspired by that palette. This is now the third look that I've done using these products in my collection inspired by the Oceano palette. It's just a beautiful color story. So yeah, definitely a good lesson in duping the vibes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want to be notified when I make new videos, and also check out my Instagram for more makeup pictures in the description box below. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.